On today's episode, former Tonight Show producer Todd Yasui.
Jay used to say, look, I wasn't the handsome leading man guy. You know, there were guys who might have written some funnier jokes than me and everything, but no one will work harder than me. That's why he lasted for 22 years at the top of the game.
So the one thing that I try to tell everybody on this team, anybody that will sit still long enough to listen, you can't always outsmart people, but no one can outwork me.
It's time to go inside Quest with host Tom Bilyeu, president and co-founder of the second fastest growing private company in America. And now he's uncovering the universal principles of success.
I can tell you right now what principle number one is: follow your passion.
Inside Quest starts right now.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Inside Quest. Our goal here is to challenge amazing people to divulge all of their secrets, and hopefully all of us can grow more powerful as we do it. Today's guest, Todd Yasui, is a very humble man, so I'm going to introduce him with just the facts. At age 23, he got his first byline in the Washington Post, where he spent 6 years ultimately working his way to assistant editor for arts and entertainment. He could have stayed at that job forever, but he didn't, and he decided to leave that cushy job for a 13-week stint on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. But he managed to turn that 13-week stint into a 5-year run as one of their segment producers. He was the guy that managed to convince Hugh Grant to come on the show after soliciting a prostitute, which ended up being huge for Hugh Grant and absolutely massive for the show. And in fact was one of the things that helped The Tonight Show become the #1 late night show. And that was a ranking that they ended up holding for the rest of Todd's tenure. He's held a lot of very high profile positions in a lot of high profile television shows. But the thing that makes me most excited about him, and the reason that I'm super amped up to have him here today, is his ability, his unique ability to identify and articulate the principles and philosophies that have led to his success. So without further ado, if you guys would help me in welcoming Todd Yasui. Todd, thanks so much for being on the show.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
So many people live their life by accident. They never really seem to get their arms around a particular strategy that they're executing to make their life what they want it to be when they close their eyes and dream. But you seem very different from that. You seem to have really codified rules that you live by. To help us understand that and to draw us into that world and hopefully give us something that we can digest and use in our own lives, tell us a little bit about your father, his bedside manner, which he became famous for, and how you've used that in your own life.
Sure. I grew up in a small town, and my father was a very prominent surgeon in this small town, so a lot of people looked up to him. So as I was growing up, I would often have people come up to me and say, oh my God, your father is so nice. I work as a janitor at the hospital, and he came up to me the other day and asked me how I was doing and said hello to me and asked how my family was doing. That's so amazing. And as a teenager, my thought was, why is that amazing? Why wouldn't they come up and say hello to you? And they said, none of the other doctors at the hospital do that. I'm a janitor, and they walk by me in the hallway and don't even acknowledge me. So that was something at a very early age kind of struck me. I was very proud of it, but again, I didn't understand that.
You were proud that your dad was that kind of guy?
Absolutely, and it was something that I really kept with me for a long time because, again, as a kid, you only do what you see in front of you. You mimic behavior that's in front of you. So having a good mentor and a role model like that is invaluable to take that forward for as you grow older and get in the positions of power.
Okay. Now, so you end up finding yourself in a position of power, in some cases very significant positions of power throughout your career, both at the Washington Post and then later in Hollywood. So obviously I get what the strategy the other doctors are employing is, hey, I'm of high status, you're of low status. It does not behoove me to extend a hand to you. It's a stupid strategy because I think you're going to elucidate how you can actually flip that coin and use it to be effective, very effective in your job. But you've said specifically that acknowledging other people's work is one of the most profound management strategies you've used. Why is that true?
Well, as you know from your company right here and all the people in the room, no one does it by themselves, right? And in any given business venture or any task in life, there's going to be forces aligned against you, right? There's going to be competition. There's going to be people within your own company. There's going to be technological things that don't go well. There's going to be a myriad of things that are working against you. So you need every bit of resource that you can to succeed and overcome the obstacles. There's going to be obstacles, and no matter what it is you do, whether you're opening a restaurant, whether you're trying to run a marathon, whether you're trying to create a TV show, you want to have every force lined up in your favor. So the best way to do that is make people feel that that they're special, they're part of the process, that what they're doing, although they might not be able to see it in the moment, is contributing to the larger success. And one of the ways I've done that is many times is if I'm on a show and there's a crew of 160 people, I try to get to know every single person, not just know them, but what do they do? And how does what they do affect me? And then I try to acknowledge for them where their contribution fits into the larger success. It's a fairly simple motivating factor, but one that you don't see a lot of people do. The people tend to have their blinders on and kind of focus in on what they're doing.
So one thing that I think in totality of what your experience shows is leveraging something negative. You call it psychic aikido, right? So leveraging this negative energy that's coming at you, and you just mentioned it a minute ago, there's forces are working against you. There's a really famous example in your life of Pappy.
Yes.
Talk to us about Pappy, and talk to us about how Pappy becomes sort of a recurring motif in all of our lives.
All of our lives. So when I was 17 years old, I was trying to find a summer job in a small town in Pennsylvania, which is very difficult because you have all the teenagers running after all the same jobs.
Right.
And I couldn't get one, and my father was the physician for the Little League Baseball World Series. So my dad was able to pull some strings and get me a job on the grounds crew. Okay, so that meant being there at 6 in the morning and working for 8 to 10 hours a day, cutting all the lawns, trimming everything, cleaning the bleachers, painting, you name it. It's very, hard physical labor.
Right.
First day I get there, the man who's running it is an older gentleman named Pappy. And Pappy sees me pull up with my father. My dad's dressed up nicely because he's going to work then, and he immediately looks at me and says, "Rich kid," when I walk in. And it's like, okay, I'm working for minimum wage on this ground crew. I'm not that rich.
Right.
And he kind of took a dislike to me immediately, and then he said to me, "You're Asian?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "We killed gooks like you in World War II. This is my first day on the job." Yeah. And that's the way the job started.
Right.
And it got progressively worse from there. The first day on the job, he started handing out assignments, and he gave everybody the gas-powered weed whackers. And then it got to me, and he goes, "Here you go." And he handed me a pair of rusty hand clippers. And he said, "You've got field number 9. And so for 8 hours, that first day of my job, I was on my hands and knees clipping with these rusty, dull clippers around the baseball field while I watched everyone else buzz around with theirs. I didn't say anything because I just figured this is what the job is. And I did it for 3 days straight. And by the end of the third day, I had to switch hands because I had blisters all over my right hand. Then I got them on my left hand, and my hands were shaking so much. And I hadn't thought to complain because my dad was like, "You're lucky to have a job," which I felt lucky. But then I was at lunch one day with some of the other crew guys, and they looked at me and they go, "Why are you using those grass clippers?" And I said, "Well, Pappy told me that there's no more electric ones or gas-powered ones." And they said, "Oh, no, we've got like 3 of them. We've never seen them make somebody do that before."
Jesus.
And I thought, okay, that it's personal.
Right. Yeah.
I was too naive even after the other statements to think that it was personal. And that's when I started to get angry. As a teenager, you're very concerned about your sneakers. You and I had a conversation about the importance of sneakers in a young man's life and everything. And he would spit chewing tobacco juice on my sneakers every day. And so I went home to my dad and I said, "Dad, this guy's literally spitting on me." And he's like, "Well, you're going to have to tough it out." And it just kept getting worse. And after a couple weeks or a month, it really got to me. And I said to my dad, "Listen, I can't put up with this abuse anymore. I want to quit." Right. And my dad looked at me and said, "Well, you can quit. I'll allow you to quit. But I want to tell you something. That's exactly what he wants. He wants to break you, and he wants to make himself feel better." He said, "There's going to be a Pappy in every job you have for the rest of your life. Right. And you're not going to be able to change that or control that. The only thing you can control and can change is your reaction to these Pappies in your life. So what do you want to do?" And I said, I'll stick it out."
I want to walk through that moment because at 17, that would not have been my response. I would have said, "I can quit, awesome." And that would have been that. And it really, for me, was much later in life that I realized, for me to actually get where I want to go, I'm going to have to figure these things out. You can't just dodge every time dodge is an available option. So how did you wrap your head around that?
Part of it was a teenage defiance where once my father put it in the context of this guy wants to beat you down, he wants you to quit, you're giving him what he wants. Then it became a little bit of teenage defiance. Well, I went back and my father said, my suggestion is no matter what he throws at you, do it with a great attitude. He goes, you can accept a crappy job, but if you do it with a crappy attitude, you haven't progressed. And I took his advice, and then it just became a psychic mind game for me, honestly. This guy is trying to break me. He's trying to get me to crack, and I'm not going to do it. And so whatever he threw at me, I'd go, no problem, I'll do it. And I'd go do it, and it kind of drove him crazy, which I liked too. You know what I mean? And then slowly, I noticed that they started making jokes with me as opposed instead of about me. And when came time for me to go back to school, the guy shook my hand and said, "Great job." And that was satisfying. Again, I don't know at that age if I were savvy enough to realize that this was a life lesson. But in the moment, I did feel a sense of accomplishment.
Right. I'm well aware that we all sort of mythologize our own existence just to condense it down, if nothing else, and put it into a digestible format. But it really does seem at some point that you realize that that was a very powerful strategy to use. As you've employed it several times, you have even more stories, which we'll get into in a minute. But the thing that really struck me going through your pre-interview is the consistency of I hit a roadblock and I don't stop. So the book Linchpin, what it's trying to show people is the old way of clocking into a career and staying in the career for the next 40 or 50 years. Those days are done. Like, that's not the way the world works anymore.
Right.
The way the world works is you have to come in, you have to bring value. You have to prove yourself by doing a better job than anybody else. And obviously you're going to encounter roadblocks along the way, and it's about how you deal with those roadblocks. And the thing that I find fascinating about your story is, unlike me, sadly, in my early years, when I hit a roadblock like that, I would try to dodge it, to just get out of the way. I wasn't using psychic Aikido. I wasn't flipping it back on people and learning a powerful lesson. I was just sort of scurrying away from the trouble. Most people, when they leave a job, so it is said, leave because they don't like their manager, not because they don't like their job. So it's ultimately this personality conflict. And the thing that I really want these guys to understand from your story is how you have so consistently encountered pappies in your life. And while your handling of the pappies has evolved over time, the concept has stayed the same of I've got to, I think your exact words were, no one can fault you for doing a great job with a great attitude.
Right.
Can you talk about the pappy you encountered on The Tonight Show?
I've been at the Washington Post for 6 years, was entrenched, could have retired there, and on a dare from a friend, I called up Jay Leno's manager on a complete dare and talked my way into a job as a talent executive to book The Tonight Show. My boss right above me had decided one time he was going to go a week without looking at me in the eye. He would call me into his office, and I would walk in, and he would look down his paper, and he goes, "I want you to go make these phone calls and do this and do that." And then he would do that to motion me to get out of his office.
Wow.
You know, the first 4 or 5 times, it's like, that's kind of odd. Then after a couple days, I'm like, oh my God, this is a total, screwing with my head. Like, what is the purpose of this? And then after a week of it, I'm like, is this ever going to end? And then it got worse and worse and worse. This is another pappy. I can't control it. He dislikes me, and, look, you're never faultless. So this is not to say that I didn't do things to irritate him, or I didn't do things that deserved to be, scolded for. But in general, I thought I'm doing a good job. Everyone seems to think I'm doing a good job.
Right.
I'm going to work twice as hard than everybody else here, and I'm going to do it, again, with the same attitude. I'm not going to let him get to me. And I got to say, in this case, it got to me. And after months and months and months of this, there was this big turnover at The Tonight Show that that's what the Late Shift book is about, and the movie is about, is when they were going to replace Jay Leno with David Letterman at the time because his ratings weren't great. And this particular boss, he thought he was going to rise up in power, which spelled doom for me.
Right.
So he actually called me at home and said, "Hey, I don't know if you've heard, but I'm the new boss, and your ass is mine now."
Wow.
And it was such a blatant threat that is where my psychic Aikido did not work. And I was like, wow, okay, that's not subtle at all. My ass is grass here. I'm going to get fired.
Right.
And the abuse kept going. And it was the worst type of abuse because it was psychological abuse. This thing, we're not looking at me, and things like that. And I finally realized that it wasn't just me. it was other people too. But everyone was afraid of him. And it was the one time in my life I said, you know what, I'm going to make a stand here. And I'm going to do something outrageous, which is I'm going to quit this job, which is a dream job.
Right.
And it is absolutely everything I could have ever dreamed of. But I'm going to make a point and I'm going to quit because I won't put up with this kind of abuse. I've tried the hard work, great attitude
Right.
approach. It wasn't working. And so I quit. And they said, why? And I said, look, no one else is going to say this, but I'm going to say it. This guy is very abusive, not just to me, to other people on the staff. And I think that he's a negative for the product, which is the show. I'm going to give you the names of 4 or 5 other people who are on the staff that know what I know but would never say what I'm saying. Call them at home on a weekend, tell them that it's completely anonymous, and just ask them what their opinion is. And if you can corroborate my accusations, then by all means you can fire him and I'll come back. And they did that, and they called me back and they said, you're right, we've heard it from other people.
Wow.
And we're getting rid of him and you come back. And that's what I did. I came back and stayed for the next 5 years.
And then there's an interesting ending to that story, which is 5 years later, he calls you back.
Yeah, so 5 years out of the blue, he called me. And I took the call thinking, like, this is going to be interesting. You know, what could possibly this phone call be about? And it turned out he was going to get a job at a show that he thought he was going to run the show. And he said to me, I would like you to be my head of talent. And I was incredulous and said, really? I said, this is a little shocking to me. You obviously know why. And he said, well, here's the thing. He said, we had a personality difference, but it was never about your work. He said, your work was untouchable. And so I can put aside the personality things to get you to do what you do in the job. And that blew my mind. So it was, again, a great lesson that I learned. It was like, again, there's going to be people in your job that don't like you. You're not going to be able to control it. There's going to be people who are, you know, they're either jealous of you, or there's going to be people that don't like your gender, or the way you dress, or your sexual orientation, or your age. There's going to be people who don't like you for whatever reason. But you can't give them ammunition, which is your work. So if you're doing great work and you're doing it with a good attitude, they can never, no one can be fired for being weird, or no one can be fired for looking a certain way. You can only be fired when you're not performing your job. And so that's a lesson, again, that I took with me.
So reading that story in the pre-interview, it gave me the chills. And it reads literally like a novel. So I'm reading your stories and it's going, and we encounter Pappy again, and I'm like, oh God, not again. And it, you know, goes into you quitting, and I was like, that can't be how the story ends. There's no way. Like, this is my man. He doesn't back down. Like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So when it ended with him calling you back, I was literally like, I've got to stand up. I've got to, like, clap and cheer, because so the one thing that I try to tell everybody on this team, anybody that will sit still long enough to listen, is one simple thing. You can't always outsmart people. Or at least I can. Maybe you can. But I have failed many times to outsmart people. But no one can outwork me.
Right.
No one. So, because it's the one thing I control, right? The one thing I control is how hard I work.
That was Leno's philosophy. Jay used to say, you know what? When he was coming up in the business, the show business, he said, look, I wasn't the handsome leading man guy. You know, there were guys who might have written some funnier jokes at me and everything, but no one will work harder than me. He exemplified that. The guy was in there at 8 in the morning and he left at 9 at night, 5 days a week, and then he worked till 1 in the morning every night on the monologue, and then he went out on the weekend and tried out new material. That's why he lasted for 22 years at the top of the game.
And it really is incredible. And it's one of those things that's the best news that anybody could give you, right? Is that it doesn't matter what your natural skill set is. It doesn't matter if you're the handsome, good-looking, leading man type or not. You can always outwork people. It's the one thing that's in your control. It's all your fault. It's all within your control. And I know people spaz out when they hear the word fault, but I actually read that in your pre-interview. You were talking about that, where there was a segment you were producing. You didn't think it was a good segment. You were executive producer at the time. You didn't think it was a good segment. The guys finally bugged you about it enough that you greenlit it, let them do it, and of course it tanks. So you're thinking, okay, here we are, and then the blame ended up falling on you. And what was your response to that?
my producers and the host of the show, who you try to defer to the host of the show sometimes, really believed in this segment. And I said, this is going to be a turd. It's going to suck. And they said, no, it's going to work. It's going to work. And here's the thing. I'm totally willing to do things by committee at certain points. Sure. I don't claim to be the smartest guy in the room. If I hear 5 people saying this is going to work and I think it's not, I'll go with the 5 people, okay? And in this case, it was 3 people saying it's going to work, it's going to work. I said, listen, it's not going to work, but you know what? Let's give it a shot. So I'm sitting there in my director's chair on the set. The segment's going on, and it is just a bomb. It sucks. And one of my bosses, Robert Morton, who was David Letterman's executive producer for years, came by, and he leans down just to bust my balls and goes, hey, great segment, Todd. And my response was, hey, Morty, it's not my fault, man. The host and my producers said it was going to work and convinced me. And he goes, you're the executive producer. Everything is your fault. And I was like, touche. And again, he's right. It's the buck stops here.
What I loved was your response to that, which is, it's all my fault, and that's empowering.
Absolutely.
Because so many people, they crumble under the weight of accepting responsibility because it makes them feel badly about themselves, right? And from an evolutionary standpoint, I get it. Things that make you feel good, you move towards things that are advantageous to get your genes into the next generation, and things that make you feel better because those things put you in danger. And losing status is one of those things that puts you in danger of not being able to procreate. So I understand the sort of internal battle that's going on, but when people can see the positive, when they can escape the sort of more primitive parts of their brain that are getting tense about that, then truly amazing things can happen.
Yeah.
And when I've been asked about my secret to success, it is exactly that. There's nothing more. The one thing that took me from being a struggling copywriter to running my own business was finally admitting it's all my fault. And by fault, I just mean it's all in my control, right? I can do something about it. And for me, that wasn't crippling. It didn't make me feel badly about myself. It was empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what boss doesn't appreciate hearing someone going, you know what, my bad? First of all, it shows confidence to say, I made a mistake. What you hope comes out of that is, I made a mistake, my fault, but I know why I made the mistake, and I won't let it happen again.
That really is something that I hope you guys take away from his stories. And I want to pick up on something that he just said about being willing to take those risks and being willing to change course or change direction. When you look at his life, one of the most interesting things is how often you've reinvented what you're doing. And I want to start it off by reading a quote that I saw in your pre-interview, and I thought, wow, that's so powerful. So I come on the show, and I almost always end up asking the guest one question, which is, why do people fail to go on and do what they want in their life, right? They end up working a job that they're meagerly happy at, but it's not the true passion of their life. And every answer has been the same so far: fear, right? They're afraid of something.
I actually have a quote. Is this my quote?
Yes, this is
your
your
my
quote.
God, I'm impressed. I thought it was going to be from like Oscar Wilde or something.
So the thing what you were talking about was being willing to take a risk, what it takes to put yourself in that position, and your answer was passion, which always rings a bell with me. And you said, when you're phoning it in and the passion isn't there, recognize it's time for a change. And that's what you said when you were at the Washington Post, very prestigious. You ended up having a great 6-year run there, but at the end is when the quote about phoning it in comes in. So walk me through the mindset change, how you realized that you wanted something more, and why you were willing to take such a big risk.
All my colleagues were just dying to be full-time Washington Post reporters. You know, they wanted to take down governments and write about world events and everything. My passion wasn't where everyone else's passion was,
Right.
And after 6 years, I had hit a ceiling. And I remember very clearly, I was kind of like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I went in to talk to my boss, and I said to her, I took the job because it was a job, and I love it, and I'm not looking a gift horse in the mouth, but I don't know if it's my passion. And she said, well, you can decide then, you know, what your passion is. And I walked back to my desk thoroughly disappointed, because I thought she was going to say, you know what, I recognize your genius and here's a promotion. And she didn't say that. She was basically telling me, like, you know, shut up or move on. And so I sat there and I thought about it. I'm like, yeah, you know, it isn't my passion to go cover politics and write about politics and everything. And I didn't know what my passion was. What I did know is that it wasn't this right now. What's the worst thing that can happen if you pursue something and it doesn't work. I mean, this is a philosophy I talked about before about catastrophizing. Fear is based on the idea of what is the worst thing that can happen if I do this? What if I leave this MBA program that I'm in to go take this job at an entry-level thing? What is going to happen? Oh my God, I've wasted money. And you start catastrophizing. You've got your mind, you've got your body, you've got your education, or you've got your life experiences if you don't have a college degree. It doesn't matter. You've got something that you can take to another level.
And I agree with you, but I'm going to stop you there because so the goal of this show for me is not only for myself to learn, but to empower other people to really understand and have the tools they need to actually create change in their life. So I think you address fear in a very interesting way, which is, yep, we all have it, but if you're phoning it in, it's time to make a change, and I think that's great. So let's say that they're young, they've got no responsibilities, they're going to make that change. I think they're still not going to. And the reason I don't think they're going to make that change is because they don't know what to do. And it's not knowing, okay, I'm willing to take that risk, but oh dear God, where do I go? Mm-hmm. Was your decision to go to the Tonight Show really just on a lark? Or was there something driving it that you can help people latch onto in their own life? A way of like processing what you want to do next?
So when I had the conversation with my boss about what am I going to do here, can I get a raise, can I move up, and her philosophy and her advice to me was, you know, you might want to reassess what you want to do. And this is no embellishment at all. I was walking back from her office to my desk, completely dejected, and my phone was ringing as I was walking back to my desk. And I picked it up and I said hello in a dejected voice, because I was dejected and sad. And it was an ex-girlfriend. And she said, whoa, what's with the grumpy voice? And I said, well, I just got out of the boss's office and she didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. And she basically said to me I should reassess what I want to do in life. And that's not what I wanted to be thinking about at age 28. And my ex-girlfriend said to me, I know Jay Leno's manager. I did some public relations work for her. Why don't you call her? And so I said, what am I going to say to her? And she said, just talk to her and see if you can get a job with her. And I said, well, what is she doing? And she said, well, Jay Leno's taking over the Tonight Show from Johnny Carson. You should see if they have anything there. And so I said, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And she goes, okay, here's her number. So I picked up the phone and I called the woman, and she acted incredibly annoyed with me. And I wasn't used to it, because usually when I would say my name, and then I'd say the Washington Post, they had some respect for the institution. And
Right.
their tone was usually, oh, what can I do for you? And hers was like, why are you calling me? And I said, oh, listen, I'm a friend of Haley's. And listen, I heard that Jay's taking over the Tonight Show from Johnny Carson. And you're the boss, and didn't know if there's any jobs there. And she started laughing at me and said, like, no. She's like, that Tonight Show's been closed for 29 years. I've got thousands of people applying for jobs. Do you think you can just cold call someone and get a job at the Tonight Show? And I'm like, well, I don't know, I just call in. And I said, yeah, well, listen, I'm not sure what your plans are for the new Tonight Show, but I got to tell you got to do something. I had a cockiness about me because I figured it wasn't a real job interview. So I started giving her my opinions on what they should do, although I had no right to give opinions. I was just having a fun at that point. And she said, okay, well, listen, give me your number, and if anything ever comes up in the future, we'll let you know. And I hung up and said, oh, that was fun. Went on with my regular job, and I got home that night, and there was a message on the machine from her saying, listen, I can't get over this phone call we had today. Call me back. And I called her back, and she said, listen, this sounds weird, but I'm going to change your life. I'm going to give you a job as a talent executive at the Tonight Show, and I'm going to fly you out to LA, and I'm going to move you out here, and your life is going to change. That was it. There was no other preamble or anything, and I was like, whoa, what, why me? This doesn't make sense. And she said, well, number one, she said, you don't have any friends in Hollywood, which is a good thing because you don't owe any favors. That means you don't have any enemies in Hollywood. Number three, because those were two, three was that you come from a world that's not just showbiz oriented. I would like to have the Tonight Show have a little more kind of intelligentsia on once in a while instead of the WB sitcom actor.
Right.
Let's have an author on once in a while, and you're the type of guy that could do that. And she said, and finally, I liked your attitude. She said, you weren't intimidated by me, and you actually came forth with some constructive things to say. You didn't just ask me about the show. You said, here's what you should do. And she goes, therefore, I'm going to change your life, and I want you to move out here in 1 month.
Wow.
I could have stayed at the Post till retirement, and I said to her, how long does this job last? I was very naive. And she said, you have a standard 13-week deal. And I go, how does that work? And she goes, well, every 13 weeks, we evaluate how you're doing, and if we don't think you're doing well, we get rid of you.
Wow.
I said, so you want me to give up everything I have in D.C., move to Hollywood, and you're only going to guarantee me 13 weeks? And she goes, that's television. Take it or leave it. And so there was a moment of like, do I jump off? Do I take the chance? What's the worst that can happen? I come out to L.A., I suck, they fire me. All right, I have a good story to tell. I worked for 13 weeks on TV, great. And then, okay, financially, I'll find another job. I don't have kids, I don't have college loans right now. I'm going to take the chance. And that's what I did. I took the chance.
So it is a very common question to ask, what's the worst that could happen? And I want to answer that. And hopefully I can completely erode your confidence in that answer, because really bad things could happen. So, and I'm not talking about being homeless or what. You can always find another job, right? It may be terrible work and it may force you to downgrade your lifestyle. I get that, and I'm not saying it's easy. But you have one thing that's truly precious in life, really only one, and that's time. My biggest fear for people is that they're not living by any sort of strategic plan. They're not saying, this is what I'm passionate about in life, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to accomplish. The reason your move is so important to me, and the reason it was so powerful, and if it was a confluence of luck and where you were mentally, I'm fine with that. But you made what I would say is the right decision. You found that passion, and again, you found something that you really enjoyed, and you've stayed with it for a very long time. You've been very successful. So the biggest fear I think that people have is that they either never make the move, which is the single most terrifying thing ever, because staying in a dead-end job, now that's a guarantee it doesn't go well.
Right.
Or they move to something without much thought that isn't good for them and is only going to be another dead-end job, and they're going to find themselves with the same problem, because people's real problem, it isn't fear. They don't know what they want. And if they know what they want, they don't know how to get it. So, and I really wish I had some secret answers. And one of the ruses of this show is to find somebody who can give me that secret answer for how people that don't yet understand their deepest passion, how to give them a divining rod or something that they can figure it out. Because once you know that, once you know where you're trying to go, now you can execute a strategy. But if you don't know where you want to get to, there's no strategy to execute. And there's an awesome Tony Robbins quote: if you don't know where you want to be in 5 years, you are already there. And if that isn't the most terrifying statement on the planet, even for me, right? So somebody from the outside is going to say, oh my gosh, you've got a lot of success. Like, why wouldn't you want to be there in 5 years? And I don't want to be here in 5 years, and I'd be terrified to be here in 5 years, because my goal...
That means you've stultified? That means you've plateaued then, right?
100%. And very specifically, I have failed to achieve my concrete goal. So my concrete goal is to end metabolic disease. So if I'm going to do that, I haven't done it yet. So if I'm still here in 5 years, it means I have failed to accomplish that task. Every minute that I spend has to answer a very simple question. Is this the most efficient use of this moment to move you towards your goal? If it is, then I do it. No matter how hard and painful. If it isn't, I don't do it, no matter how much fun it might be. So I have had to insulate myself from the 100 requests for time, because it's actually not the best thing for that person, right? It's definitely not the best thing for the company. But it is the most pleasurable, and that's the irony. For me, one-on-one connection, there's nothing I prefer to that, nothing. And I used to come in every morning really early, and I would sit in what we call the living room here, and I would invite people, oh, come spend time with me, and it was awesome, and I had so much fun doing it. And then I realized, whoa, I'm ruining their lives by spending this time, because they have entrusted me to build this company into something that they can leverage for their own deeply selfish and hopefully wildly passionate desires. And if I'm sitting here and we're having fun and it's the intellectual equivalent of drinking a beer and hanging out, I'm not going to be able to do that. So, and that's part of the genesis for this show, was to create a way where we could share the mindset that I would share in the living room with people, but in a way that was able to hit more people at once, so that collectively we could go on.
Well,
and
let
do
me
something.
throw a challenging philosophical question at you,
Please.
which is you said, your goal is to do this in 5 years, and if you haven't accomplished that, do you consider that a failure on your part?
Not if we're moving, no.
Okay.
And one thing I've learned about every goal I've ever set for myself is it always takes me longer to hit that
Sure.
than I'm expecting. Now, I never go into it thinking, oh, it's okay if I miss it. But progress is all I demand.
Right. Okay. So because what I've thought of before is like I've always said to myself, what is my 1-year plan, my 3-year plan, and my 5-year plan? And the importance of setting goals is crucial to success, because some people, and I don't know if I'm in this group or not, some people only derive pleasure from reaching their goal and accomplishing their goal.
Right.
But I know a lot of people, once they get that goal, they're immediately uneasy again because they don't have now a thing to shoot for. So they have to keep changing. So I think taking the time to kind of enjoy the journey there, and then saying to yourself, if I reach my goal, is that going to satisfy me, or do I now set an even bigger goal, so that you're constantly kind of challenging yourself to that goal? Or if I get there after all this hard work and I haven't quite achieved it, and I don't have the answer to this, which is, will I be satisfied by continuing to try, or am I going to look at myself as a failure because I haven't done it? Like, one of my big things is I want to create a show that lasts for 10 years while I'm working on it, and then continue, like The Daily Show, that just continues going no matter who's hosting it year after year after year. I haven't achieved that goal yet. If I get that, am I going to be satisfied? And the answer is I don't know. Or am I, the next thing I'm going to say, now I want to create the next Seinfeld. You know what I mean?
Well, I hope it's that, right? So as you're telling that story, and I knew I was supposed to feel bad for the person who achieves that goal only to then set another goal, but I was like, ooh, I like this guy.
Right.
Because that really is how I think. And while I love the journey, because for me, the thing that gives me the most pleasure in my life is the acquisition of a skill with utility and then putting that utility to the test. Because I think of where I started, like I started as the funny guy, and no one took me seriously. I didn't take myself seriously. I didn't believe that I was necessarily destined for anything great, but I was really ambitious. So I had this big vision of what I could accomplish with my life, but I didn't have the drive to get there. And so once I learned that drive was a skill and I could train it and I could get better at it. And The Matrix for me really was the movie was this really big watershed moment in my life where he plugs into the Matrix, he doesn't know Kung Fu 1 minute and he knows it the next. And that was so clearly to me an allegory for real life, in that, okay, I can't plug something into my head, but I can read a book. And so I took sort of my burgeoning interest in reading fiction and I switched it over to reading nonfiction, and I thought, okay, this is going to be my entry into the Matrix. And by the way, I'm going to give the greatest secret that I have. If you want to jack into the Matrix, you should be listening to audiobooks, and you should be listening to them at 3x. Now, when you first try to listen to it at 3x, I get it, you're not going to be able to.
3 times the speed?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have to start at 1.25, then 1.5, then 2, then 2.5, then 3. But ultimately, once you're there, now you're getting a book, at least if I'm a slow reader. So for me, that was like absolutely critical. I had to find a way to read faster, and audiobooks became that thing for me. And you should be watching this show at 2x. YouTube only does 2x, otherwise I'd encourage faster. But getting the information that much faster to me is so potent. So that's my greatest joy, right? To encounter new ideas, to recognize I can change my brain, that much like lifting a weight, I can actually make my brain stronger. And then in real life, I can put those skills to the test to see if they work. And so when I say that my goal is to end metabolic disease, that's the current way in which I'm deciding what skills to acquire and by which I measure whether those skills are working or not. But if we're actually able to pull it off, if my partners and I manage to do this moonshot, then yeah, we would move on to the next one with joy.
And what's the metric of measuring ending metabolic disease? How will you know the indicators of that happening?
I'm going to give you a really controversial answer.
Okay.
Once it feels like obesity is a choice, or heart disease is a choice, or cancer is a choice, then we'll know that we're on the right track. And what I mean by that is right now, so much is working against you. So few people have real knowledge that they understand, and it's presented in a way that they can digest and then activate. And then, even if they understand it, because of the way the food industry works, it is so hard to find food that tastes good, so acknowledges your humanity, which is that we all eat for pleasure, not for sustenance, is convenient, is reasonably priced. It's so difficult to find that, right? So, and even us as a company, we have failed to reach the goals that we need to reach in terms of the ubiquity of our offering, in terms of the widespread choices that we're going to have to deliver. And look, we scramble around the clock, but we know that we're way behind what we have to do in order to actually make a meaningful impact in that. So right now, while there is a narrow band of people that have the discipline, the knowledge, and all of that to execute on what the world knows now, I think for the vast majority of people, it just isn't yet a choice.
And how do you attack that from the consumer level or from the corporate level? In other words, do you work on changing people's habits and their mindset and their knowledge, or do you go after the industries that is polluting and responsible for creating these epidemics?
Right. I think at the end of the day, you're going after the human mind, no matter what you're trying to do. So the body is a reflection of the mind. There's two ways to get at the mind. You can go through the body and put people in a virtuous cycle, right? Because for most people, eating is a very negative spiral. They eat something because it makes them feel good. They gain weight, which makes them feel bad. The only thing that makes them feel good again is the food, which makes them look bad, feel bad, and we just get into this downward spiral. So you can reverse that. If you get people eating the right thing and they find pleasure in that and they find joy, then they start looking better, they start feeling better, so they start eating better, they look better, feel better, and you get them in a virtuous cycle. And that ultimately will feed the mind with a positive self-image. The other way is just to go to the mind directly. And one of the things we've always said as a company, there's two things that we export. One, the products. Two, the philosophy, what we call the Quest spirit. And my partners and I, none of us were born with the Quest spirit. All of us were, Mike was not lazy, but I think Ron and I can pretty safely claim to be very lazy individuals. So for us, even just that, even having the drive to chase these ambitions that we had to be a learned skill. So as we put it all together and realized all the things that we had used to change ourselves to finally create something that was successful, that there was nothing special about us. It was merely anything anyone could learn, and our goal with this show and with our high-touch ambassadors and all of that is to communicate something that's powerful to the individual regardless of its application. So I don't need them to even care about our products, but that mindset will serve them in anything that they do. Man, I really can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This was such a pleasure reading through your pre-interview, scouring the internet, looking at some of the stuff that you've done, and just seeing somebody that clearly had a strategy, that was executing that strategy. It's a tremendous result. It was really inspiring. So
I appreciate
thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching another episode of Inside Quest. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. This is a weekly show. And be sure to also check us out on InsideQuest.com. There's a lot of really cool stuff there, supplemental material, be able to see questions with our guests, all kinds of really awesome stuff. So be sure to check it out. Until then, we will see you next week. Be legendary, my friends. Take care.
Coming up next, Inside Questions.
You were involved in convincing Hugh Grant to come on The Tonight Show after he was caught with a prostitute. I want to know, was there a principle that you applied to winning him over?
Yeah, I think, there's a famous saying that a good deal is when you win, and a great deal is when both sides win. Our rating went through the roof that night, and it's kind of a footnote in his career now. People don't really talk about it that much anymore, so I think we all won.